Tom, what an honor to have you in Stories in AI. Welcome, and how are you today?
Thanks, Ganesh. Happy to be here. I'm doing very well. Hope you are as
Yeah,
well.
I am. I am. Thank you so much. And where are you calling from today?
Santa Barbara, California at the moment.
That's
Lovely
nice.
place. If
That's
only it would rain a little bit more, we'd all be very happy in California. So.
nice. Awesome. Tom, why don't we get started with your background, your story? Everybody knows you. You're actually a celebrity in analytics and AI and for organizations. But talk about how you got into data, your journey, and where it is today.
Sure. Well, I was initially a user of all of these tools as a graduate student, and then I paid my way through graduate school dispensing statistical computing advice. And then I decided I was going to become a sort of a regular academic sociologist, which was my academic training. And I found it kind of boring to sit in my office all day and write papers for a few other academic sociologist. So I decided I was going to go into consulting, almost went to business school to get an MBA, but barely escaped a couple of weeks before I got a job at a IT strategy consulting boutique in Cambridge, Mass. And so started doing a little bit of consulting, but I ended up gravitating toward research and writing, so-called thought leadership activities, and got into, I guess, my first real interest was from a publishing standpoint was on business process reengineering, and then that migrated into ERP systems and how to get value from them, and then knowledge management, and then analytics sort of came out of knowledge management because I noticed that people were managing a lot of text-based knowledge, but they weren't really focusing on extracting value from data using the same sort of ideas. So I started writing stuff on that, and became a lot more popular than I thought, and I stuck with that for, I don't know, 15 or 20 years. And then analytics, of course, evolved into big data and AI, which is quite similar in many ways, but has its own set
Yep.
of issues.
Got it. No, I think you have a very unique perspective, right? Having lived through all the winters of AI, really being on the. But when I look at your background and your experience, and even in your writings, it's very evident that there is an element of, you know, mixing theory and research to practically how do you actually put that to practice to make a difference in organizations, right? So that comes very clearly through. Um,
Well, I try.
so
I mean,
so
I talk to a lot of people. I do tons of interviews, and I don't really, it's not terribly rigorous research. I'm sure some of my academic colleagues don't find it terribly impressive, but I find that, if you jump into an area early and you interview a lot of people, you can provide some
you learn a
value
lot.
to practitioners.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that learning. So why don't we start from the top and the case on you wrote very early on, you wrote about the advantage with analytics and data and AI for organizations, right? So why is it relevant today in today's world for businesses to pay attention, be a part of this revolution, and how do they really make it theirs? Why is AI such a big deal?
Well, Ganesh, I've always been interested in sort of companies who don't just sort of automate their existing processes, but they really try to change the way they do work, the way they go to market, the way they, um, create their business models. And I think AI offers an incredible opportunity to do that. I mean, certainly we can get some um, incremental productivity benefits from it, but I'm certainly much more interested in the companies who say we're going to go all in on AI, and that's my. I've been writing a lot of books. I think there's going to be several coming out this year, but one of them is going to be called, I think, all in on AI and its companies. It's kind
Mm.
of like competing on analytics, only it's about AI. It's companies that really embrace it, that really try to use it in innovative ways and really change their strategies, their business models, their key business processes, et cetera. And I think there's an amazing opportunity to do that with AI. It's an incredibly powerful technology, and those who don't, I think, will end up, falling by the wayside in many cases.
No, that's fair. So what is different this time around, right? I mean, like in the 80s, there was another way for AI, right? So
Yeah,
what's
and I was
different now?
I was
Like,
around then, and I studied those expert systems as they were called, and never wrote a book about it, but wrote some articles. And I think the technology is better this time. And by the way, some fair number of companies are still using rule-based technologies, but not exclusively. They're obviously doing a lot with machine learning as well. We have a lot more data this time than we did before. Uh, I think we're at the point where it's can't be considered, just an AI spring, or we're in perpetual spring now. It's not going to go away. Yeah, there may be, some disappointments with some technologies, and I would probably argue people who know more about AI technology than I do. Many of them think we're probably a little bit overly dependent upon deep learning as a way to sort of make
sure.
sense of the world. But it's a very powerful tool. I think if we augment that with other tools, start to be able to do more causal explanations of what's happening with
Yeah.
AI, more explainable kinds of AI, I think will be fine.
No, so Tom, actually, it's interesting you say that. Like one, I do believe the same thing. I think we're past the spring. We're actually, I think we've crossed that chasm for AI. It's not going to go away, right? I mean, it's going to be there. Now the question is, and I love how you framed it initially. The opportunity for the AI is not just to incrementally make changes, because AI gives you the kind of leverage that you can do to go unlock potential that you didn't have before, right? You didn't have means to do it. So identifying, big opportunities to grow in areas that you haven't really ventured before and things. That's what the opportunity comes in. And then I love, the on one of the lessons, and I look back and studied the last winter and stuff too, right? And I think the good thing that came out of the last thing was when expert systems and symbolic logic was the big deal, right? Now, like you very well said, there is definitely a lot more dependence on data driven machine learning and deep learning to understand the world. And the truth is actually it's somewhere in the middle. Like if we can mix those two approaches together, right? You capture common sense, like the Psych project, for example, just runs with,
Yeah, no, an
15,000
Austin,
rules.
a classic
Yeah,
Austin-based AI project that I thought was a
that's right.
really interesting idea. Unfortunately, it never really turned out to, master all of common sense.
Yeah, no, it's so, but they're doing, and I spoke to Doug Leonard recently, and they're doing a lot of work. But right now, they're like, look, take that common sense, apply it to specific small business processes, and deliver value, right? Then, and the vision was still there, but I think you take an approach like that, then you augment that with data-driven machine learning and deep learning. It can be really powerful, right? And I know there's a lot of organizations, new startups, new companies focusing on that front too, for sure. So it's great. So where is AI today? What do you see in organizations? How are they deploying this to as a tool to improve their, chances of not just survival but really thrive in this digital world? And what's working, what's not working, according to you?
Well, I think there are two classes of companies, Ganesh. They're the digital native companies, the Googles, the Facebooks, the to some degree Microsoft, to Amazon certainly, and they have already transformed their business models with AI and couldn't really exist without them in anything
Yeah.
like the um, situation they're in today. Um, and then there are the sort of legacy companies who are trying to redo their business models and transform themselves with AI. There aren't enough of those unfortunately. But there are some, as I say, I've been writing a book about them. It's a pretty small percentage, maybe 1 or 2% of the Fortune 100 or 500, but
Wow.
they to me are the most interesting ones. And then there are a number of companies that are sort of dipping their toe in, with proofs of concept or automation-oriented projects, which I don't disparage at all. I think they're really quite useful. I just got off the phone with the CEO of Work Fusion, one of the typically viewed as an RPA company, but he said, no, we're more of a
Yep.
machine learning company now. So I think there are opportunities there in the automation space, but as I said, what really interests me is how you use AI to change what you do in a fairly substantial way, not just take what you've been doing
Incremental.
and run it on a machine.
Yeah, no. So, Tom, the playbook that the digitally native organizations use will not work for these legacy companies trying to transform, right? Because, they start with a position of strength with data, direct to customer intimacy, not the legacy distribution channels. There's so much advantages they already born with in a Web 2.0, Web 3.0 kind of a landscape. So explore that a little bit for me. So what are those companies that are in the Fortune 100 or 1000, that the smaller percentage of them, what are they doing to adapt into this way of thinking with AI?
Well, it takes really strong leadership. I was just writing a little article this morning about some of the leaders I've encountered over the past year or so who are really transforming their companies. So Piyush Gupta, the CEO of DBS Bank in Singapore, is a great example. Peter Ma, the CEO of Ping An in China, which is a fantastic company, largest private sector company in China, and developed this ecosystem model with 5 different ecosystems, all of which are driven by AI. And then there's a little company that, not little, there's 700 or 800 million in revenues now, but a US based company, again, there aren't as many of those as there ought to be, called CCC Intelligent Solutions, that's using AI to revolutionize how you do insurance claims with,
Yep.
taking photos and analyzing the photos and selling that capability to USAA and Liberty Mutual and these big companies. So a lot of the big companies that I talk to are partnering, frankly, with other firms. Anthem, the big health insurance company,
Yes.
has a
Rajiv. Yeah.
number of partnerships. Other insurance companies are partnering with Vitality, health insurance companies and life insurance companies to try to start changing customer behavior using AI and, making nutrition or exercise or health care kinds of recommendations. So I think it's hard for companies sometimes to do this on their own. And so partnering with a startup, maybe acquiring a startup is not a bad idea. But Ping An and DBS and CCC, they're pretty much doing it on their own. And I certainly commend them for being able to do that.
That is awesome. No, and I, you mentioned Anthem, and I know you work very closely with Rajiv. I've worked very closely with Rajiv Ronanki and team too at
Yeah,
Anthem,
he's
and I was involved in partnering with. Yeah,
now the president of their whole platform business. And next time I talk to him, I have to ask him, well, you must be the successor CEO because they're talking about moving the whole company to a platform-based business, and you're the head of that
that's
business.
amazing. No, it's incredible, and I've seen that journey and the transformation at Anthem at least for the last 3 years or so, 3-4 years, and it's just incredible what they've been able to achieve there. And so it's to your point. I think it's possible, and there is a way to do it. And I'm hoping that all CEOs and leaders can take a lot of that playbook from your new book, All In on AI, which we'll talk about in a later episode once you've launched it.
Great.
Um,
Thank you.
right, and I think, but it involves, like you said, being having an open mind. It's about making sure that you're bringing and trying to innovate with partners in mind. You may or may not be able to do it all together, right? Because there's a lot of cultural element, there's a lot of talent and capability element, and then there's a lot of just newer thinking on how we actually bring innovation to bear, right?
Yeah, and I think the thing I was writing about this morning is you really, if you're going to lead this kind of transformation, you really need to know something about how AI works and what it might be capable of today and in the future. CCC's CEO is a guy named Gitesh Ramamurthy, not to be confused with Ganesh, and he was the CTO before and seemed to have a good sense for how technologies were going to evolve. They were trying to figure out how do we use these smartphone photos to figure out damage of cars after collisions, and the photos weren't quite up to it, and the AI wasn't quite up to it. And so he said it's basically a 10-year journey. Now, USAA was the first big company to adopt that capability, but it involves the ability to look into the future and say what's going to be possible with this stuff in a number of years. And Gitesh had done it before. He was one of the co-founders of a sales force automation company that was eventually sold to Dun & Bradstreet. And he said personal computers were just invented, and the idea of lugging them around in order to sort of see what your customer had bought from you before you call on them, it was impossible. We just thought laptops would get lighter and more powerful, and you'd be able to do it as you traveled. And certainly that came to be true.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting. A couple of things are I'm noticing the way you say it. One is there's a whole notion of techno business leadership. It's not just the traditional way. There's a new way of leading companies, initiatives, transformations, if you will. And then it really helps. I mean, connecting the dots in looking into the future, predicting where this thing is. It's a lot of trying to draw the different, what seemingly disparate pieces of transitions that are happening, like you said, this whole, all this noise right now about Web3 and crypto and decentralization as a way to actually solve certain problems. All of these different things may all be individual. It looks like individual lines looking forward, but they all can converge and create opportunities. And being able to see that becomes all the more critical as well, right? It's awesome. No, that makes a lot of sense. So one of the things that most organizations that I worked with, I mean, a lot of organizations still, they either experimenting, they made some success, but it's really hard because one of the things, AI is hard, right? So one of the things that most organizations have understood right now is it's not just important. I can't just buy my way into being an AI company. I have to change things. I have to build capacity. I have to build capability, and I have to really, invest in it for the long term, right? So brings a very interesting dynamic. An average company that started in AI 2 or 3 years ago has probably not still seen an ROI from the efforts, because it's a continuously, you got to keep investing, and then hopefully at some day it'll start pay out. So, and you've written and you've talked about it, like the whole notion of what is, I think you call it ROAI, right? Return on AI. Explore that for me. Where do you see organizations realizing value, and how do they not realize value today? Explore that.
If you want a prescription for not realizing value, don't deploy your solution, because if we don't get production deployment and we leave something as a proof of concept or a pilot or whatever, there's no economic value. I mean, it's a useful learning exercise in many cases, but you're not processing any transactions, you're not doing anything for customers, and admittedly, production deployment can be hard. That's where we have to change the business process and integrate our AI capability with the existing systems that we have, and maybe upskill or reskill some of the people who are doing the work. All of that's a lot of expense and hassle in many cases. But if you don't do it, then you're not going to get value. And I think too many companies, they just didn't make enough commitment to AI. They said, "Oh, let's try it out. Let's have a POC." But they didn't plan for deployment in the first place, and you come to the end of the POC, and they don't really have a strategy for what to do next. So I think that's the single. If you want to get no value, that's the single best
That's the
approach
way to
to
do it.
going
Yeah.
about it.
And what is commitment? What kind of commitment do you need to make AI work for you and your organization?
Well, there's a substantial investment commitment. I mean, the companies that are really into this are spending millions and millions of dollars on it. There is a commitment to your people that will keep you around, assuming you're willing to learn some new skills. And by the way, here's some new skills that you can pursue. We'll make them available to you. We may not be sure exactly how your job is going to change or what you want to do, but here's a whole menu of things you could learn from. In some cases, it's partnering, as I said. I've been looking at Shell, and they have a partnership with C3 AI and Baker Hughes, the kind of oil field technology company, to try to both transition into non-carbon based sources of energy, but also to make their existing business much more efficient by, instead of inspecting pipelines with human inspectors, flying over with drones and taking photos and analyzing them and so on. It's a huge improvement in productivity. So I think in many cases there's a lot of expertise out there, and you might as well try to form it through ecosystems as well as doing everything internally. And even in the companies like DBS says we want to compete with the digital natives. That means we have to develop a lot of this technology ourselves, but they're also trying to create, I think they have 200 APIs that link to different
Yeah.
aspects of the economy. So ecosystems and platform-based businesses, I think, are the way to go for many companies in this regard. Ping An is the master of this.
Yeah. No, it's actually interesting. I love to, that ecosystem thing. It's very relevant because I think it provides on the both sides, right? The digital native companies who started off as something else, now with the technology platform can extend their reach into other things. A great example is I accidentally ran into Stripe, the Patrick Collison's company in the Bay Area, having a banking as a service API set. I mean, this was completely out of accident. I was like, I don't know where I was in their website. I just went in, and then you can see that you can just literally add a banking service into your mobile app or into your website, complete with servicing, loans, lending, everything, all in, not non-crypto way, of course. And it's just fascinating. So they are opening up areas that are in periphery to where they are and helping with, I'm going to help you process bills and invoices. Now I'm going to go and give you a banking service to get access to funding, right? And so same
Yeah.
thing, like you said, the DBS example, the other way, right? They can now, or Ping An's example, with their ecosystem can encroach and enter other markets as well to start getting value out of it, right?
Well, and if you do that well, it becomes a real virtuous circle where the ecosystem model gets you more customers because of these relationships, and that provides more data, and that gives you a better ability to train your models and improve the AI related capabilities that you're offering, and that gets you more customers, which gets you more data. So it just really cycles in a very positive way.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, and so in an AOI, ROI for AI or ROAI, it's not just a multiple return that is just like, hey, I'm going to get 2x ROI and stuff. It's about creating that exponential return curve because you're now continuously gaining value from the little things and changes that you're making in the process, right? Um, That's definitely a fascinating thought. One of the things that I always used to uh, encounter business leaders that I either consulted with or were customers of mine in AI were like they lose patience. Like 18 months into this thing, look, I just hired a 30 people team. There's a lot of data scientists. There's a lot of data engineers, and we're put two products in production. And at least a couple of years ago, that was initially just a conversation about, oh, I may not have the right tools in place to go make that happen. So let's go talk to a bunch of new other companies. Let's add some tools and stuff. But I think we have now very well realized it's not just the tools, it's the people, the process, how they actually do it. And one of the um, um, interesting, I would say, evolutions of AI on how organizations are adopting AI is starting off with these centralized centers of excellence or COE teams, right? Where they're pulling in this bunch of 35 to 40 to 50. And I remember talking to JP Morgan Chase like 5 years ago. They had, like 100 people doing that, and their big issue. And Lori Bear was like, look, my concern is not how do I make that 100 people productive. My concern is I have 55,000 developers who are all building technology to serve our customers. How do I enable them to do more with data science and AI? So, and you've written and talked about, how data science need to be democratized for organizations to really win with AI, right? Explore that for me a little bit.
Yeah, well, I agree. I mean, there are never going to be enough data scientists out there to do all we want to do with AI. And fortunately, a number of new technologies have come along that make it possible for people without data science backgrounds to do some pretty impressive model development work and even model deployment work. And so why not take advantage of those for people who are motivated and willing to learn some new ways of doing things? A few years ago, one of the companies that I work with is Data Robot, and an automated machine learning company, and now ML Ops
Yep.
as well. And I interviewed a number of their customers. I remember talking to a guy who was the senior risk executive at RBC, Royal Bank of Canada. And he said, I have a couple of choices. I could maybe, if I'm lucky, hire some data scientists and have them build models. It's unlikely they'll know much about banking or my customers or really even care all that much because, they want to build models and that's what they're good at. Or he said, I could find somebody who understands my customers, maybe an analyst type in the bank, somebody who knows banking, and say, okay, here's some auto ML tools at your disposal. See if you can develop some models. And he said, in most cases, I'll take the latter. And there are a lot
Yeah.
more of those to choose from. So I've been a little disappointed at how quickly companies have embraced this idea. There are, in my book, I've been writing about Kroger and their data science subsidiary 84.51 degrees, one of the more oddly named companies, but that's the longitude of Cincinnati where they're based. And they said they do a lot of longitudinal models, but they have, in addition to having a lot of data scientists, they've also empowered these people they call insight specialists to develop
Mm-hmm.
models with auto ML. And in many cases, they say the models are better predictors than the ones developed by data scientists because they understand the business and know what features and variables to incorporate and so on. So I if I were starting an AI operation now, I would definitely not try, let's just hire the usual, suspects in the data science area. One, that's really hard to do. There aren't enough of them. And there's this other opportunity. Clearly, you need some data science types to help you, maintain guardrails on people's models and
Sure.
see whether
Having
the
an off.
things that, yeah. But I think we're really missing out on an opportunity if that's all we do is assume that you've got to have data scientists to do everything in AI.
No, it's fascinating. You call that out. I think one of the trends, and I think I definitely think on the hype meter, it's a little high. The no code, low code platforms for AI right now, because one of the things that after exiting my last startup early last year, the year before, end of a year before, I was exploring what do I do next. And one of the concept that I tested out was auto ML, just focusing on either a particular domain or vertical, but then how do you capture the human knowledge that's usually on the edges, not in the COEs with employees, and give them the tools to go do it. And something I found out was actually a little interesting, and maybe it's moving very fast, so these things change quite quickly. Number one, most critical business problems that need to be solved through AI, most organizations, if there is belief and understanding that AI is going to solve, be a huge part of their digital transformation journey, they get the budgets to hire those data scientists. They get the budget to actually get that centralized folks, right? So what ends up happening in auto ML projects is usually you're stuck with problems that are not tier one problems for those enterprises. So it's probably a tier two, tier three problems, which leads to the same problem, which is there'll be experiments, but nothing will go into production, right? So one area that I walked away with saying, well, if you can build the infrastructure for those things also to go into production as a part of your regular CI/CD pipelines and things like that, maybe there is an opportunity. Just make it easy. The other thing I found out was in this process, I think we're clubbing a lot of different things into this data science world, right? If you look at the traditional BI and self-service BI tools, I mean, that's where that market is also going. So there is that aspect of, if I can just do experiments on data that'll inform decisions I have to make or my department has to make, but it's not something that's going to completely transform the organization. And so I think the BI folks will, or capability sets, when that matures with more inbuilt and built-in AI, is going to help solve that problem. That was my takeaway from exploring that market a little bit.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I think we are incorporating too much into the data science role. We need to sort of break that apart into a whole variety of things: data engineering, data product management,
Yes,
in a sense.
that's huge.
There's the whole ongoing maintenance issue with tools like ML Ops and so on. And maybe that's a different job. The translators, the people who can make sense of it to the business and get their trust that it's worth doing something about. We really, if we're serious about this, there are really a whole set of jobs, a whole set of activities that we really need to build the capability for. I was talking to Capital One recently, and they said we were trying to hire 3,000 data engineers in 1 year. We couldn't do it. So we just started retraining a lot of our people internally and built a data engineering course. Is phenomenally popular. And I think we're also missing out on this opportunity to take a lot of our existing people and give them new skills that make them much more valuable to the organization.
I totally agree. I think you have a very, very that's a brilliant perspective, because I think if you really look at every organization, nobody has met their hiring goals in data in the last year. Everybody I talked to, nobody could hire the data scientists they wanted to hire, the data engineers they want to hire. So if you really double click, you'll see that there is a lot of separation of concerns that you can do in that same job family, right? So you now have a data scientist job family that you write up where and say, I want this person to do modeling. Oh, they should also be able to be an expert in Python. And then, hey, I want them to package it in a way that can be deployed in production. And then, number one, they have to maintain it. So if there's data drift, they have to take the model out, retrain it, put it back in production. And they're like, wait, that's unicorn. We don't have people like that. There are probably very few people in the world that can do all of that, right? And I think while it's a noble goal to create this AI superstars who can understand the entire life cycle, the more practical approach will be break that down into 5 different jobs, and you might actually be more successful, right?
Yeah. I mean, I still think that data scientists should care about deployment and so on, and should respect how important it is. If their models never get deployed, eventually somebody's going to say, I'm not sure we really need you around here. But having to manage it all themselves, I think, is way too much to ask.
Awesome. Tom, I have one other area, and I'm keeping an eye on the time. The notion of ethics and trusted AI, right? There's a lot of talk. There's a lot of momentum. There's a lot of public policy announcement and work happening and stuff. How should organizations think about this whole framework of responsible AI, right? I mean, what are some, frameworks that they should be thinking about?
Well, the frameworks and the policies are easy, frankly. Everybody says the same thing. We want responsible AI, transparent AI, and so on. It's the day-to-day enforcement and administration of those policies and frameworks that's challenging. And I don't see a lot of that happening yet. I don't think that people have created roles or committees or responsibilities for doing that yet. They just sort of draft some policies. Frankly, until pretty recently, the vast majority of ethical AI people were at vendors. They were at Google until Google fired a lot of them anyway.
Yeah.
They were at Microsoft, they were at Salesforce, et cetera. Now, a few companies have started to create these roles within the company itself. But I was talking recently to a consumer products company. I can't really name them yet because they haven't approved what I wrote about them. But they created a set of policies, and then they started to say, wow, anything we do, for example, on workforce AI is probably going to violate some emerging rules in Europe and New York City and so on. So even though there's a huge opportunity for using workforce AI to hire the right people and avoid attrition and so on, we have to be really, really careful if we do anything in that area because of the regulatory policies that are emerging on it. Facial recognition AI is another area. The IRS just backed away from that yesterday after thinking, we're going to use facial recognition AI to confirm that you are who you are when you want to call us to talk about your taxes. Not that there's anybody there to actually answer the phone. So I think that day-to-day administration of these approaches is going to be very difficult. The other thing to remember is human beings are also very biased in their decision making. And so we have to say, okay, AI can be biased because it's created by humans using data about humans in many cases. But is it less biased than the human decision making about hiring or how we treat customers or whatever? And the other thing we have to keep in mind is there aren't that many stories. We can tell the same stories keep coming up about AI bias. If I hear again about the Amazon hiring bias, I'm just not going to be able to keep my lunch down. We need to realize this is not happening that terribly often before we overreact and overregulate.
Yeah, it's actually true. I think the two things that, and you're so right. I think there is a lot more good that is happening than bad, and obviously, any kind of news media, it's you're trying to play on the alarmist news. So obviously, that gets Hollywood writes the narrative for AI at least for a long time, right? It had been writing the narrative for AI, but I think that the one. Go ahead, sir.
Well, I was just going to say I'm a visiting professor at Oxford now, and there's a team of people who are writing an article about these AI disasters, and they've been able to identify 100 around the world over the last 10 years. That's not really very many, given how many people and companies and projects there are in the world.
That's so true. But I think that said, the other thing that you pointed out, I think it's very critical that you need a way to manage this on a day-to-day basis. How do you really capture this and make sure that everybody working towards is compliant, there's no reputational risk, there's no all the risks that are associated with AI, the unintended consequences risk, if you will, right? So I think the whole, even though I wrote some predictions or bets for the year this year, and one of the things I said was like AI ethics will still be and will remain a buzzword. But I don't think organizations will start really, they start taking it seriously, but to really help them take it to the next level and really ingrain that into their day to day, there needs to be a lot more maturity in tools and capabilities that needs to happen, right? And it's happening. It's slowly happening.
Yeah, and particularly if we're democratizing it, we're going to need some tools that let us know what the heck are people doing all around the company in
Yeah.
this area. If
And
before
then
you productionize an algorithm, somebody might want to take a look at it and make sure it's not going to be very embarrassing.
yeah, for sure. Tom, this has been fascinating. What are you working on? Talk to us about the books that you're writing, and when do we expect that this year?
Well, I wish their publishing processes were faster, but the first one is going to be it's called "Working with AI" from MIT Press, and um, it's 29. We did have 30, but my editor didn't really like one of them. 29 cases of people who work day to day with AI, and collaborating with a machine, smart machine, and um, we do the case studies, and then what are the lessons that we can learn about the future of work from that. So that one is, I think, coming out in early fall. The next one coming out will be a book about AI in healthcare. It's called An Advanced Introduction to AI in Healthcare. Really focused more on providers and how much should they invest in AI,
That's
and is it clinical or administrative or device related or whatever. And then the third one is the one that I was saying more about, the all in on AI one. That's from Harvard Business Review Press, and it's looking like October, maybe November for that one.
yeah.
These
I'd
books
love
take
to.
a long time to come out, sadly.
No, yeah, well, I mean, thanks for doing that. Thanks for writing it, and I can't wait to get my hands on it. Definitely want to talk to you offline on the healthcare and AI thing. I think there is there's some. I've been spending a lot of time personally on that space as well. On the one hand, and then the last book, the All In on AI. The headline is very clear to me, right? It's AI, and if it's in AI, it's go big or go home, right? It's basically you have to just go all in to win with AI. Um, this
Exactly.
is awesome. Tom, this has been fantastic. How can the viewers and listeners get in touch with you? Where can they find you on the internet?
I'm pretty easy to find. I'm on LinkedIn. I publish a lot of stuff on LinkedIn or create
Yeah,
links to it. It's tomdavenport.com. Um, uh, my email address is available through tomdavenport.com. So I'm easy
perfect.
to find, easy to contact.
Awesome. Tom, this was a blast. I learned so much, and I'm sure the audience is going to learn so much. Thanks so much for spending the time.
Thanks for the opportunity, Ganesh. Great talking to you.
Cheers.